These are the adventures of a temporarily out-of-work wife and mother, and I DIY'd my master bathroom, and I started with my favorite spot in the house, my bathtub. I documented that process and uploaded videos that showed what I did on each day. But this video is dedicated just to the bathtub area. So I started with removing the old caulk and the old paint that was around and on the bathtub and the walls. I used this cool little toolkit that I got from the Amazon, and it's available in the link in my bio. I also used a box cutter and a putty knife. Initially, to remove the debris, I was using my regular broom and dustpan. I quickly realized that was a bad idea, so I went and got a hand broom and dustpan set from the Amazon. And let's just say this was way more work than I expected, but I got it done. Then I moved to repairing the crack that was in the wall. If you watched the day one video, then you saw how that trip to Lowe's went. It was very interesting. Nonetheless, this was not a very difficult task. Before I actually repaired the wall, I wanted to make sure that the tub and the entire wall were both as clean as possible, and I also wanted to make sure that there was water in the tub because I had to make sure that once the tub expanded, the crack wouldn't return. I used medium grade sandpaper to sand that crack, and then I used wallboard joint compound to fill the crack. I let it dry for 24 hours, came back and sanded it, and did it again. While that first coat was drying, I went ahead and used the big gap filler to fill this space between the wall and my tub. It's not necessarily a crack. It's more so an indication that when the builder was installing the tub and putting up the drywall, they didn't fill the tub up with water first so that the tub and wall space could actually expand before they caulked it. So to alleviate that, we're going to use the big gap filler, and then we're going to re-caulk. Now, clearly, I oversprayed this big gap filler. The way that it works is you are supposed to spray a very thin line and allow it to expand to fill the gap. I didn't do that. So that meant I had a whole lot of cleanup. And then I didn't use the right tools to clean it up. So I end up using this caulk tool, trying to scrape it off like I would caulk, and it did not work. So then I had the big gap filler all over the tub, all over the tool. And then instead of using 99% alcohol, I attempted to use acetone. It worked somewhat, but not perfectly. This is what the big gap filler looks like when you allow it to set. So clearly, a little goes a long way. The material is such that you can cut it, sand it, and paint it. But because of its proximity to the tub, I'm going to cut off the excess, clean up the tub, and apply a beautiful trim to hide any defects. So the following day, I sanded and reputtied the crack in the wall, and then I proceeded to cut the big gap filler that was overflowing the gap in the wall. I used the box cutter, the putty knife, and the 99% alcohol to get that excess off of the tub, and it worked perfectly. However, this was indeed a long, tedious process. So learn from me. Do not overspray the big gap filler. You can always practice spray it on a piece of cardboard, a bag, etc. that you can just throw away. And once you have a good command of how to utilize the nozzle, squirt out a very thin layer and be sure to wipe off any excess with a wet rag immediately. If you overspray, do not continue spraying. Stop and remove the excess. And anything that you cannot get off while it's wet or partially wet, allow to completely dry, because then it becomes really, really easy to scrape off. So now that that's done, it's another day. We are cleaning the heck out of this tub and getting ready for caulking. Another lesson that I learned is before using the big gap filler, go ahead and tape off the area. That will also make cleanup so much easier. I remembered to tape before caulking, but I should have taped the tub off before I started filling it with water. While the tub was filling, I figured that would be a good time to remove the towel racks and hooks from the wall. Not so much. I ended up having to do acrobatics, gymnastics, something to get the towel rack down while leaning over a tub that was full of water. So of course that means I dropped something in it. And this is the towel rod that we will be installing. Then I went ahead and removed this towel hook from the opposite wall. The plan was to replace this hook with 3 individual hooks for washcloths and a new towel rack. And since we didn't need the drywall anchors anymore on this particular wall, I removed them and got some hole filler. So now I am taping off the tub so that I can caulk. This tape was not waterproof, so imagine my annoyance when I dropped the entire roll of tape in the tub. Not once, but twice. This is the point where I was tired and should have just went to bed. But nope, I kept on pushing. Because I am one determined young lady, I tell you what. And you know what they say, when it rains, it pours. I got this professional grade caulk gun. And I got this professional grade silicone caulk. And they both came with instructions. Instructions that I did not read nor follow. As a result, the caulk tube exploded right in my hands. And then the video ran out. There was caulk all over my hands, all over the floor, all over the caulk gun, all over my shirt. Now don't let this dissuade you from caulking if you've never done any caulk. Just learn from my example. First, you want to cut the tip so that it's the size that you want the bead of silicone to be when you squeeze the caulk gun. Then you want to use the little puncture tool on the side of the caulk gun to pierce the seal on the inside of the tube of silicone. By pushing it down inside of the hole that you just made in the tip, you'll hear a little pop and you'll feel it give. Failure to do so means that the tube of silicone that's already under pressure is going to be under more pressure when you start loading the gun. And what you think is going to happen? Just like any other kind of gun, it's going to backfire and explode all over you. Ask me how I know. So I used the amount that I was able to salvage, but then I had to call that lady's son that I married and have him bring me a whole nother tube. I waited for him to bring it. I went ahead and cleaned up what I could because I wasn't going to need to go back over those particular areas again. And I just needed to fill in a few little gaps and then do the rest of the tub once he came. And because that was 30-minute silicone, I needed to hurry up and remove that tape. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be able to finish cleaning it up later. So alternating between that tool, the putty knife, and my finger, I was able to clean it up very nicely and get a nice, smooth, clean, tight seal. And now that we have another tube, let me show you how this is done the right way, and it's at normal speed. So you see I got caulk all over it, right? But anywho, I cut the tip to the size I wanted, and I'm using the puncture tool to go down inside the tube. Sorry that the view is not that good, but you can see where there was some resistance and then there wasn't. And then I'm putting the actual caulk into the gun, and then I'm going to remove the gap between the top of the caulk gun and the tube of caulk. That can be done one of two ways: the slow way, squeezing the hammer, or by pushing down the metal lever and then pushing in the bar in the back. And once the tube is flush with the top of the caulk gun, I can actually load up the caulk gun by pulling the black handle. And the silicone will start to immediately begin dispensing from the caulk gun and create a perfectly beautiful line. And once I didn't have to reach over the tub as far, baby, I was rocking and rolling. Look at that beautiful line. I then proceeded to caulk the bottom of the tub, around the sink, the shower, and in the hall bathroom. And then it was time to paint. Now, if you watch my day-by-day videos, then you know that I was using milk paint to paint this over the toilet storage cabinet. And that paint was only intended to be used on furniture. But because I was exhausted and listening to my husband's criticisms about the fact that I had yet to paint a single solitary wall, I decided to go ahead and paint this wall. Well, I forgot to switch out the paint to the paint that was actually intended for the wall. And I used all of the rest of that milk paint on this wall. I used it on maybe 2/3 of the wall before I ran out of paint and realized that I was using the wrong paint. I was so upset. He ended up replacing it, and I ended up going to bed and getting back at it the following day. Next day, I cleaned the tub out and did all of the things that I forgot to do in my haste the day before. This time, I covered the tub in drop cloth so that I wouldn't have all of that paint that I needed to remove from the tub. And I taped off the edges so I wouldn't have to worry about having to remove the tape from the baseboards and the caulk. And this is the correct shade of gray for my accent wall. Thank God that it was the paint plus primer, so I did not have to worry about the first paint bleeding through or having to use way too many coats to cover it up. The only reason why I painted this line by hand and didn't tape it off is because I'd just painted the rest of the walls the beautiful white shade. And somehow I managed to make this line straight. I'm proud of me. And as soon as that wall was completed, I removed that tape so that I would not have bleed through and I wouldn't have a whole lot to clean up. Using that 99% alcohol and that paint thinner, I did a great job of cleaning up any spillage, and then it was time for installations. So I started with installing the light switch cover later on in the day after the paint dried. I realized after I got it on that I actually needed an oversized light switch plate. So I switched that out later on, and then I went ahead and I installed the towel bar. Because the base was the same size as the previous one, I was able to use the existing wall anchors. So that made this a little easier. I had to make some small adjustments just in the placement in order to get it to fit properly. But other than that, it was good to go. There were a few defects in the paint, so I touched that up. And then I removed and installed a new overflow cover for the drain and a new drain plug, both of which were broken at some point over the years due to improper cleaning. And once that was complete, it was time to install the towel bar that we got from the Family Dollar. And this thing was hard as heck to install. So one of the things that I like to do with anything that has like nail holes in the back or picture frames is to use tape on the back of the item and punch the hole, then put the tape on the wall and punch the hole into the wall in the same place where the hole is in the tape. That helps to ensure that you have it properly lined up. So once I did all of that, I removed the hooks from the towel bar, installed it on the wall, painted it with the milk paint, and then reapplied the hooks. And this is what it looked like when it was done. Next, I installed the individual hooks, which somehow I managed not to capture on film. Another great tip is to use a digital leveler, and that helps you to ensure that your pictures or whatever you're hanging is actually level on the wall. From that angle with the camera, the picture looks crooked, but according to the leveler, it was completely straight. Now, I did hang these pictures a little skewed to the left because I was going to need to install the corner caddy organizer, and I did not want it to be butting up to the pictures. Later on, I went back and took them all down, filled the holes, painted, and then reinstalled them smack dab in the center. Because every time I looked up there, I thought, why is that skewed to the left? And then I remembered why, and that just bothered my OCD. It looked even worse when we added the clock. After that, my noonie and I installed this beautiful trim above the bathtub. It hides the defect from the big gap filler and also gives the tub area a very nice, elegant look. It's a great compliment to this accent wall. I installed my corner tub caddy, and then I painted my corner storage organizer. The next day, I cleaned all of the items that were originally on it and either returned them to it or found them all a new home. And now it's time for the last of the major tasks in the bathroom makeover project, painting the ceilings. Yep, I almost did it, y'all. I almost got up on this step stool and painted this ceiling without taping off these walls. Do you know how mad I would have been? Child, forget about it. As soon as I got this thing up there, I was like, girl, if you don't get down off this ladder and go get you some tape. Thank God I listened to myself. And I went and got the tape. And then I proceeded to paint the ceilings. As you see, as I went along painting this ceiling, I kept stopping to wipe the wall or even to wipe the tape so that the paint wouldn't drip from the ceiling to the wall. And I still got paint on stuff. And this is the finished product. You see the clock that was added after the fact, as well as these push lights that are also remote controlled. All of my bath items are now on the corner caddy. We have the monogram towels, and all of my Mother's Day items are in place.